Across the rainbow seas of the Phlogiston drifts a Leviathan of living crystal and black iron, the Spelljammer. A ship so vast it carries cities upon its back, older than any world it visits, and guided by no known hand. The Spelljammer itself is a colossal manta ray-shaped vessel, about 20 miles long, with a city built across its back and towers that rise like spires. It drifts silently through the Phlogiston, followed by smaller ships that worship or fear it. No one knows who built it. In the lore, the Spelljammer may be alive, guided by an alien intelligence that never speaks. When it chooses a new captain, called the Keeper, that person becomes symbiotically linked to it until death, after which the ship vanishes to seek another. Legends say that all lesser spelljamming helms are fragments of or imitations of the one that powers this living ship. This ship, or creature, or god, is where the name of the setting comes from. The Legend of a Spelljammer book for AD&D frames it as a kind of cosmic myth. The ship has always existed, older than recorded history, a wandering ark that connects civilizations but belongs to none. The original Spelljammer AD&D Adventures in Space was published by TSR in 1989. The author is listed as Jeff Grubb, one of the great names in game design. Jeff was one of TSR's core designers during the 80s and 90s. He co-created the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game in 1984 and Manual of the Planes for AD&D, and contributed to Unearthed Arcana. Grubb helped develop both the Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance settings, and later created Spelljammer in 1989 and Al-Qadim, Arabian Adventures in 1992. After TSR, he continued working under Wizards of the Coast, co-authoring D20 Modern and the Star Wars adventure Tempest Feud. He was co-author on the Gamma World Alternity campaign setting. Furthermore, in 1992, TSR released The War Captain's Companion. That box set was written by Dale Hawk Henson and Jeff Grubb consulted. It expanded the Spelljammer setting with detailed ship-to-ship combat. That box set gave Spelljammer tactical depth and a sense of verisimilitude, everything from tonnage and air envelopes to morale, crew management, and boarding actions. It made commanding a magical galleon more immersive. Spelljammer also introduced the ability for travel between several published campaign settings, such as Greyhawk, Dragonlance, and the Forgotten Realms. In the original Spelljammer AD&D Adventures in Space from 1989, the entire Dungeons & Dragons multiverse was imagined as a vast sea of glowing rainbow-colored ether called the Phlogiston. Within this sea drifted enormous transparent crystal spheres, each one containing a self-contained universe, a sun, moon, planets, and all the space between them. Realm space held the Forgotten Realms, gray space held Greyhawk, Kryn space held Dragonlance, and so on. A spelljamming ship could sail through the void inside a crystal sphere, then find or create an open portal in its shell to slip out into the Phlogiston and navigate along established flow rivers, the natural currents that linked one sphere to another. Old TSR maps even charted these routes, showing travel lines between the known spheres of the prime material plane. It was a cosmos of adventure, where the stars were oceans and the worlds were ports of call. I should point out that while Mystera had no access prior to Dragon Magazine from 1990, Voyages of the Princess Ark, it hinted at limited crossover, but originally was ambiguous, and Ravenloft and the Dark Sun settings were not accessible at all. And obviously, Planescape was not connected to the Spelljammer setting either. For those unaware, the term phlogiston wasn't invented by any game designer. It came from primitive 17th and 18th century scientific beliefs. Back then, chemists believed that all combustible materials contained an invisible element called phlogiston, a fiery substance released during burning. When something burned, it was thought to lose its phlogiston. The theory explained fire before oxygen was discovered, and for a while it was accepted as science, until it was disproved in the late 1700s, discovering combustion involves oxygen combining with matter, not phlogiston escaping. The Spelljammer setting imaginatively wove this bit of archaic pseudoscience into its universe. In Spelljammer cosmology, the phlogiston was a literal sea of that once imagined element, a glowing multicolored ether filling the void between crystal spheres. It was wondrous and deadly. You sailed your ship through it like an ocean between worlds, but if you ever brought open flame or sparks into the phlogiston, well, everything around you would ignite. Gunpowder didn't work there, and spells that produced fire were strictly strictly forbidden because, well, they destroy everything, including you. These details gave the setting a tangible sense of danger and consequence. A careless player could end their entire campaign with one misplaced torch. In the original Spelljammer AD&D Adventures in Space and the War Captain's Companion, ships didn't fly in a vacuum the way sci-fi vessels do. TSR instead built a consistent framework of magical physics that made space fantasy feel oddly believable. Every ship, and even every person, carried its own bubble of breathable air. About 1 month of air for every 10 feet. When two ships came close, their air envelopes merged, allowing boarding actions and close-quarter combat without the need for spacesuits. That air would degrade from fresh to foul to deadly over time, which encouraged refills on planets or asteroids. Every ship had a single gravity plane bisecting it horizontally. Everything above fell towards the deck, and everything below fell towards the hull's underside, meaning you could literally walk along the ship's belly. If two ships collided, their gravity planes would realign according to the larger mass. A magical chair linked directly to a spellcaster's life force. The pilot expended spells to power the ship, with bigger or more efficient helms granting higher spell jamming speeds. It played like a naval miniatures war game. Distances were measured in 500-yard hexes, and ships relied on catapults, ballista, bombards, and boarding tactics. The War Captain's Companion box set even came with counters, maps, and a tactical rulebook so players could run ship-to-ship battles without breaking immersion. That mix of hard numbers and magical logic gave Spelljammer a sense of, well, kind of a reality, a coherent fantasy physics you could actually play with. Now, the 5e version stripped nearly all of that away. The basic rules mention air envelopes and gravity planes, but only as flavor text. There are no mechanics for air degradation, gravity plane interactions, or tactical ship movements. Ships are reduced to stat blocks with hit points, armor class, and speed. Ballistas exist, but firing them uses the same simple attack roll format as any monster. So while 5e technically name drops those legacy ideas, it doesn't use them. The original game treated spell jamming as its own subsystem, a mini-war game seamlessly woven into roleplay. The new version treats it as background decoration. AD&D Spelljammer was released in '89. This was 2 years after one of my favorite games, Star Frontiers, had been discontinued. And not because it failed creatively, but because TSR's new president, Lorraine Williams, redirected resources into her family's Buck Rogers franchise. Since she personally profited from those projects, TSR's existing sci-fi line was quietly killed off to make room for what turned out to be one of TSR's most infamous missteps. You can check out my full Star Frontiers video for more details. When Star Frontiers was phased out in '87, right after Zebulon's Guide to Frontier Space, many of its most imaginative alien species were about to vanish with it. Rather than let that happen, TSR's designers salvaged the Yazerians and Dralicites, renaming them the Hadozee and Plasmoids. Both species slipped naturally into the Spelljammer setting's weird, whimsical ecosystem. Some fans have long speculated that the insectoid Thri-kreen were another carryover from Star Frontiers' Vrusk, but that is incorrect. The Thri-kreen appeared earlier in 1983's Monster Manual 2 for 1st edition AD&D, and were an original creation completely separate from either of the later space-themed games. TSR tried to expand Spelljammer beyond the table. A 15-issue DC Comics run, one PC game called Pirates of Realm Space, and a short story in Dragon magazine. Compared to Dragonlance and Ravenloft, the line barely left orbit. Despite rumors, there was no Spelljammer miniatures box set published by Ral Partha at any time. That kind of support only showed up decades later with WizKid's 5e line. With TSR's long string of poor management decisions, Spelljammer was phased out around '93, when the company shifted its attention to Dark Sun and later Planescape. Both are excellent settings, but there was still plenty of room for Spelljammer to continue. We didn't hear about it again until 3rd edition, between 2000 and 2008. Polyhedron magazine number 151 published a 3e minigame called Spelljammer Shadow of the Spider Moon. It was essentially a soft reboot, simplified ship rules, a darker tone, and set in its own new crystal sphere. Many believe it was WotC's testing the waters for a full revival. During this time, Dungeon and Dragon magazines occasionally referenced Spelljammer races such as the Niagi, Gif, and Arcane. Fan communities, most notably Beyond the Moons, a long-running fan site, kept the setting alive, building full 3e conversions with WotC's blessing. After 2nd edition Spelljammer, the crystal sphere spheres, and phlogiston weren't officially written out of the D&D lore until, yep, you guessed it, that game we're supposed to call 4th edition. Because of course, the entire setting was reimagined by people seemingly allergic to imagination. They replaced the elegant old cosmology with what they called the World Axis model, an overhaul that effectively wiped out decades of established lore and replaced it with what felt like cheap imitations. In that version, space wasn't full of phlogiston and crystal spheres. Instead, worlds literally floated in a silvery void called the astral sea. Planets, gods, realms, and even mortal worlds existed as islands in that glowing expanse. Spelljamming ships still existed, technically, but now they sailed through the astral sea instead of the phlogiston. While it loosely incorporated spelljamming ships, for example in The Plane Above, Secrets of the Astral Sea from 2010, that was the true death of the original Spelljammer universe. Now, side rant, in my opinion, every single thing about 5e that sucks came straight out of that game we're supposed to call 4th edition. Every single thing. It's as if the Ryan Johnson fan club got together to design 4e, gutting decades of established lore just to mark their territory like canines on a fire hydrant. And to be clear, I'm not making a value judgment on the mechanics themselves. If you like them, fine, enjoy them. But as someone who makes lore videos, I'm consistently running into the unnecessary, profoundly terrible consequences of those changes. Anyway, back to Spelljammer. I'll go yell at the clouds later. Then came 5th edition. I was genuinely thrilled to hear that Spelljammer was being revisited. So thrilled, in fact, that I briefly forgot how bad WotC can be at releasing coherent, enjoyable material. But opening that slipcase and reading through it, well, it felt like discovering your Halloween trick-or-treat bag was just full of raisins in those little red sun-made boxes. Now, before we go further, understand that I can't possibly cover everything wrong with 5e Spelljammer in this short YouTube video. I'm not exaggerating. It's just so bad. Gone are the crystal spheres, gone is the phlogiston. The ships remain in name only, just hollow shells stripped of their rules and meaning. With Spelljammer and AD&D, you had to be prepared for an enormous sandbox. And throughout this video, I need you to remember, WotC owns all of that. All they had to do was convert it to 5e, and they could have been printing money. Instead, they released a slipcase with 3 barely usable books. One is the main setting book, which, if you're a fan of the original, reads like it was written by someone with only a marginal understanding of Spelljammer, and who then procrastinated until Sunday night before the Monday morning deadline. It's absolute garbage. The next book is a monster compendium, which, without coherent ship rules, forces the DM to railroad the players into encounters with those creatures. And speaking of railroads, the third book is a long, much too long, too tedious, and seemingly written for the sole purpose of making both new and veteran players hate the setting. And it didn't have to be that bad. They could have just included a softcover booklet with a few short sample adventures, freeing up room to finish the campaign book with ship rules, and, wild thought here, make Spelljammer 5e usable. You know, if you think I'm being too harsh, let me remind you again. WotC owns all prior AD&D releases. The project lead could have simply said, hey, pretend 4e never existed. Take all of these AD&D books and convert them to 5e. Maybe some people would have complained about rehashing old content, but it wouldn't have killed the setting. In fact, it might have excited new players and reignited passion in longtime fans. Now, before I give my final thoughts, I need to mention the Hadozee controversy. You can choose the simple but wrong answer, or the complex but right. And this turned into a 7-page discussion presenting facts of what felt like a lecture on the importance of critical thinking. Then I realized, I was trying to reach 2 different audiences. Those who were interested only in objective facts, which is where I reside, and those with strong, emotional, often politically charged opinions. After thinking about this approach, I realized I was wasting my time trying to persuade anyone into reason. As Jonathan Swift wrote in 1721, you cannot reason a person out of a position he did not reason himself into. Therefore, I'm simply providing the objective historical facts here. Your conclusions are your own, and do not assign beliefs or intent to me me that I have not explicitly otherwise stated. In 1982, TSR released Star Frontiers, featuring the Yazerian species, gliding, intelligent, primate-like beings known for their clan honor and a tradition called the Life Enemy. They wore battle harnesses for high-gravity environments and evolved naturally on a dimly lit world. Some details seem to have been inspired by Wookiees from Star Wars, but unlike the Wookiees, nothing in any Star Frontiers material depicted them as enslaved, nor were they experimented upon or magically altered. Zebulon's Guide to Frontier Space from 1985 expanded their lore without changing these facts. After Star Frontiers had been discontinued in 1987, TSR adapted the concept for 1989's Spelljammer AD&D Adventures in Space, introducing the Hadozee. Clearly, these were the Yazerians reimagined for Spelljammer. They were described as small, gliding, simian-like creatures native to warm jungle worlds, curious and sociable, often working as sailors aboard elven spelljamming ships. They were never portrayed as slaves or creations. They were free allies and adventurers. No version of the game prior to 5th edition altered that premise. But in August of 2022, Wizards of the Coast published Spelljammer Adventures in Space for D&D 5e. A new paragraph, absent from every earlier source, claimed that a wizard had experimented on Hadozee to make them intelligent, planning to sell them as warriors before his apprentice freed them. The edition appeared without explanation. Almost immediately after the digital release, social media users on Twitter and Reddit circulated posts objecting to the new lore and to the accompanying illustration. Some users placed the artwork besides a century-old racist poster and claimed Wizards has, and I quote, literally copied it. No evidence has ever been produced showing that the modern artist referenced or traced an older image, and the company has never acknowledged any connection. The comparison nonetheless became the centerpiece of online discussions and press coverage. Observers later noted that many unrelated images, such as dancing figures from film or comedy, can match similar poses, underscoring how easily visual resemblance can be interpreted through bias and without context. On September 2nd, 2022, WotC released a public statement acknowledging that some readers had raised concerns. The company removed the paragraph and altered or replaced the related artwork in digital editions of the book. It did not identify the author of the new lore or explain how it passed review, but by apologizing instead of engaging a discussion, WotC turned an allegation into an accepted fact. I'll try to condense my 7-page lecture into this. Does intent matter? Some people look at that picture from Spelljammer and say, well, it resembles a Jim Crow era image, therefore it's racist. Maybe to them, intent doesn't matter. Resemblance alone is enough. I can't tell anyone what should or shouldn't offend them. That's a personal reaction. But consistency matters. If resemblance alone defines racism, then we'd have to apply that rule everywhere. And if so, you're really going to have to examine every facet of your life and learn how much you benefit even today from the labor of enslaved people, past and present. Then decide if you wish to use your energy fighting for the rights of imaginary space monkeys or actual real-world racism. Now, these are my final thoughts. Probably won't be surprised to hear this, but Spelljammer was, in my opinion, the ultimate test for a dungeon master. A challenge to create the largest sandbox imaginable. My 5-year-long campaign in the 90s used Spelljammer source material, from a giant beholder ship threatening to destroy the player's world, to the heroes acquiring a massive sailing vessel they dubbed the Wanderlust. They sailed the skies across vast distances to new adventure locations, even to the moon, where they met moon gnomes who produced moon cheese. One of my current players still speaks fondly of those adventures and longs for their modern character to find a spelljamming helm. When I think of the great Spelljammer ship mentioned in the video's introduction, I'm reminded of Disney's The Black Hole, specifically the Cygnus, that massive Gothic starship drifting on the edge of the cosmic abyss. Its interior was cathedral-like, full of flickering lights and echoing corridors. A ghost ship ruled by an obsessed scientist. That imagery, a colossal vessel adrift in the void haunted by mystery, fits the Spelljammer perfectly. TSR just reimagined it through the lens of fantasy rather than science fiction. But you can trace the idea back even further. The Flying Dutchman, the mythic ghost ship doomed to sail forever. The Spelljammer follows that same pattern, eternal, unreachable, occasionally glimpsed and always shrouded in legend. Then there's Jack Vance's Big Planet and Larry Niven's Ring World, massive artificial worlds adrift in space, filled with countless civilizations. Even Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness hums faintly in the background. That same sense of ancient machinery older than humanity, still running on forgotten laws of the cosmos. So while Spelljammer is rooted in D&D's multiverse, it belongs to a far older storytelling lineage, the tradition of cosmic derelicts and living ships where exploration feels like trespassing into the domain of gods. I could have gone further into AD&D ship rules, but without a meaningful 5e comparison, what's the point? 0 times 1 is still 0. Spelljammer for 5th edition was made by cold, lifeless, soulless, unimaginative hacks, published by a company that doesn't understand the opportunities it squandered. They already owned one of the most imaginative settings in tabletop history, and treated it like filler for a quarterly release. I feel like I spent more time in this video thinking about what made Spelljammer great than they did producing that 3-book slipcase. By trying to revive Spelljammer, they killed it. And I don't know who thought it was a good idea to release any of that. If it was up to me, I'd make sure that project lead never worked on another game again. But at least they gave us a solid reminder not to give them our trust or money ever again. This is Aten, your host and friend here at We Love TTRPGs. Thanks for watching.